All right. So with that, we all move on to the next session. And as I was just telling Tana that it has worked out well, that in the morning we had good shake, and now we can all settle down with Tana's interactions with us. I've known Tana on a personal capacity, but before introducing her in that with that notion, it's only fair to read out her bio, which is very illustrious in its own ways. Dr. Dana Trivedi, faculty at Amrut Modi School of Management, Ahmedabad University, is currently pursuing her postdoctoral research at the Institute of Advanced Studies in the Humanities, University of Edinburgh. Because of which she's connecting with us from the UK at very early hours. So thank you so much, Tana, and spending the Saturday with us. This is to facilitate her ongoing research on the princely states of Kathiawar and to engage in an active archival interpretation to construct a narrative of the post-colonial Indian nation state from the perspective of the princely states. With over 15 years of teaching experience in the fields of literary theory, post-colonial studies, and diaspora studies, her research interest lies in examining the ideas of nation and identity formation. She's the academic advisor for the Patni Archives, an ongoing project in archiving, digitizing, and preserving the family archives of the erstwhile Diwan of Bhavnagar state. As a part of the project, her research includes studying quarterly journals from the region and chronicling the administrative and political reforms in the princely states, especially in the early 20th century. Prior to joining Ahmedabad University, she worked as a full-time faculty with the Department of English and Media Studies, Christ University, Bangalore, for 5 years. She has also taught part-time at St. Joseph's College, Bangalore, and the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. So yes, apart from the Bangalore connection, which we both must have discovered after being in the alternate spaces, Tana and I personally connected because she's also an alumni of the first edition. So Tana and Avni, the great-great-granddaughter of Sir Patni, they both joined as a team as participants in that edition. And I think the birth of Patni Archives must have happened before, but maybe we formalized it through that edition. So that's how I've known Tana, and then with many more occasions where we keep interacting and working together. So it was very befitting to have you here, Tana, to talk to us about further about community engagement, collective memory, and interpreting archives. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation, and floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ishita. Yeah. Okay, let me begin. Is it possible to look at people while I'm talking? But if anybody is uncomfortable, it's fine, really. I mean, if you have bandwidth issues or something, then that's fine, right? Okay. Okay. Yes. No, I'm happy. I'm glad I could join in the morning so that I could get an idea about, I at least could look at everybody. I have read about your projects, and yes, very, very interesting, very interesting projects that you all are doing. I'm going to be talking about how I started, and what all I have been doing since the past 2 years, especially after being, after doing the workshop with Ishita, and just some ways in which one reads an archive. How does one engage with an archive, right? And this is again based largely on my own experiences and my own learning curve. I'm still learning. I'm still getting there, and the more I am there, the more I learn. I'm just going to project my screen. One moment. Okay, so very, very quickly. So I'm the I work very closely with the Patni Archives at Bhavnagar, and before this started, in fact, I'm just going to stop sharing because I can't see the screen and I cannot see the participants. Doesn't make sense. Okay, so I just to tell you something about myself, I belong to Ahmedabad. I have done my bachelor's and master's in literature. I have done my MPhil also in literature, which was from UK. And then I went back. I was working for a little while, and then I was in Bangalore for a few years. I got married, moved to Bangalore, My PhD is from Christ University there, and my PhD is in contemporary Indo-Fijian poetry. So my background is largely in literature, and in fact, I examine the notions of home through my in my PhD thesis. So close to what you're doing, Kaustav, in terms of where does one locate home, but I was doing it. I was looking at it through the lens of poetry and contemporary Indo-Fijian poetry. So my PhD, so that is what my PhD is in. And I have, in the meantime, I've been teaching all these years. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I work with Ahmedabad University. Um, um, so what got me interested in archives, really, I mean, I've always been interested in history in the first place. So the route to archives for me has been through history, or interest in history. So Avni, who is the who is a trustee now, one of the main people at the Patni Archive. She's a great great granddaughter of the erstwhile Diwan of Bhavnagar state. So as you know, just to very briefly tell you, when during the time of independence, India had over 500 princely states. So one third of India was under the princely rule, and two-third was under the British rule. So um, we, I'm looking at the princely states of Kathiawad. Kathiawad is a region in Gujarat, and within Kathiawad there is Bhavnagar, Bhavnagar city, and the Diwan essentially in modern day times would be equivalent to a prime minister. So it is his family that I work with, and um, so Sir Patni was anyway also quite well known because he was very close to Gandhi. Um, he was also he was very progressive for his times. He also funded students to go and study at MIT in 1920s. Um, so he facilitated a lot of these reforms and all of that. So I met Avni about, I think, 3 or 4 years back, and because I'm bilingual, she had also said that. I mean, it started with a conversation, really, saying that, will you be able to translate some of my grandfather's works from Gujarati into English? And I said, yeah, I mean, let me just look at it. And then, um, so I asked her, I said, what is the rationale of translating? She said, well, we want people to know about him. And we want to make his works more available. And then also that got us really talking about the entire project. And I said, but why will people in today's times want to read about something that was written in the early 20th century, right? If it's a direct translation, it doesn't make sense. How will somebody like Kaustav, for instance, relate to somebody in the early 20th century, and his context and where he was writing from? So these sort of conversations actually got us talking. And then at some point she mentioned that they have a whole lot of papers and a whole lot of objects back in Bhavnagar, which are just lying there. And so we also have a Center for Heritage Management at Ahmedabad University. So I, along with a colleague and Avni, we went to Bhavnagar, and we actually, we actually we went there, and when we looked at the amount of material that was there, typically, like, so many of us have these cupboards full of these bundles, right, which are packed and kept away. That is exactly the state in which we had found, the archives. And taking a stock of the number of papers, I think, is difficult, but I'm presuming over a lakh of papers might be there. So when we started looking at that, and then from heritage management, my colleague who was with us, and he said, we shouldn't even be handling these papers, because they are they're physical archives, like they're like also disintegrating. So, so then that is when really we started thinking about how we want to look at the archives, right? I mean, what's going on here? We have a whole lot of these bundles. They have been preserved. They have not been looked at. Uh, how should we be going about doing it? Um, these are the kind of questions that came up, and I have always been interested in old texts, in history, in stories. Um, So that is how we started talking about it. And just about that time, we had I read Ishita's, the call for participating in the workshop. And I think this was, so this is where I think I'll just also quickly uh, run through a couple of slides. So yeah, this is actually this is during the visit to Bhavnagar. If you all can see my slide, this is on the left hand side is a palace of Bhavnagar, the Neelam Bagh Palace. These are the bundles in which we found the archives, and that is my colleague Aditya Prakash Kant. So this is during one of the early visits to Bhavnagar when we were going through the archives and we were trying to take stock and figuring out what's happening, what is the content material, and sort of because it was a very new experience for me um, to actually go through these archives, and especially that of somebody who was who was a uh, prominent figure, in the sense we'd learn about Sir Patni in textbooks, and then here I was looking at the papers from his office. So this is and this is when this is when we got in touch with Ishita, and we participated in curating for culture, the workshops, and that really was extremely helpful in giving sort of a structure and helping us arrive at how to think about the future of archives, right? And what are we going to do with it? So this started in late 2020, and this was how it culminated with a with a sort of a presentation, it was a fairly public presentation, wasn't it, Ishita? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Very public. We had over
Yeah.
200 registered listeners for that finale
Yeah. And
session.
considering that and considering that we still had COVID going on, um, it was just the kind of right time and in which this happened, because there was so much of learning that happened just talking, just interacting, listening to people talk about their experiences with the archives, and what is a kind of scope that archives can have. Where can all this go? Because for Avni and I, Avni is an industrial hygienist by profession. She is also not a historian. I mean, both of us are not like trained historians. So in that sense, this was a very good platform for us to learn, and which is what brings me back here, basically just to engage in conversations and to see if we can learn from each other, right? Because uh, it's an ongoing process. We still find ourselves grappling with a lot of questions that are unanswered. So this happened in 20 early 2021, and uh, that I think then really started this project on a really large scale. And eventually now the project is at a place where in fact, the amount of work that Avni has done over these 2 or 3 years is like phenomenal, in terms of streamlining, in terms of cataloging, in terms of um, giving it some sense of a direction, including looking at the legalities, looking at ways in which conservation, preservation, digitization can be facilitated, looking at grants, looking at all of that. So it's actually turned out to be a much bigger project than what we could have anticipated when we started. So this also tells you something about the nature of archives, saying where do you begin and where you actually go with it. Um, you actually sometimes find yourself in really ways in which you would have never anticipated that this is what could have actually happened. This is how the archives can be done, and that is still just one way. There can be several other ways in which archives can be dealt with. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the nature of archives, and of course when we look at even the Patni archives, it's not just the texts. There is furniture, there are photographs, there are paintings, there is a library of maybe 6,000 books. So as we got into it, as we started looking at it closely, we realize the scope of it. And sometimes, which is where at the onset we might not be able to look at how big the scope is, but as you start getting into it is when you realize how wide it can be. And that can be daunting at times, it can be exciting at times. um, and that also gets you thinking about how where you're going with your, or how do you really look at look at the archives. I mean, it gets you just thinking and really asking a lot of questions. You might not have answers, but it does get you thinking about now what, right? So this has so this is what since the last 3 years, um, uh, this is what I've been doing. In addition to this, because I also teach full time at Ahmedabad University, I was very keen that um, I we involve a younger set of people, the younger generation, because one thing that's always on my mind is, uh, I am interested in this, but what about the people after me, right? How do we keep this going, right? How do we ensure that we get the younger generation interested in archival practices or even to look at archives? Because that, I think, is very important, and the onus is really on us to generate that kind of interest, right? So you cannot presume that the younger generation is always going to be interested in history, and oh, they are always bored with history. No, I don't think that's the case. I think it is about how we present history and how we look at archives, and what we do with our archives is what is going to get the younger generation interested. So for me, be it somebody working on personal archives, just family archives, or be it somebody looking at state archives, or looking at like what Nijum is doing in terms of looking at the university, the space of the university, right? Um, be it any project, or be it any archive that you're looking at, um, I think somewhere to involve the younger generation um, is really important, because it also gets you thinking about different ways in which you can engage with the archives. So for me, that has been a huge learning. Looking at creatively engaging with the archives. So, the earlier session on storytelling, I think, is very, very important, because in the end, it is stories that really reach out across generations. So while the creative side of it is extremely important, and I see a lot of importance in terms of especially facilitating everybody else to also kind of be interested in the archives. My interest has been academic largely, because that's how I'm like, I'm like best equipped to look at it that way. So because, again, coming back to Ahmedabad University, so um, I work with the age group of 18 to 20, 21, and you know undergraduate students. And I said, let me see if they can be interested, or we can get them to be interested in the project that is ongoing. Um, because ultimately, when we started talking about the Patni archives, the idea was that we want to disseminate some sort of information to the younger generation, right? Now, a direct translation of Sir Patni's work may or may not work, right? But if I'm getting a whole set of younger generation, or younger set of students, or young people to be interested in the archives in some way or the other, it might just work, right? So then that's where we were already connected by then with Ishita, and I personally am not a very structured person, but but coming together and working together and collaborating, that kind of put a lot of it gave a good direction to it, because it was a summer internship. So it was basically about just about 2.5, 3 months, not more. And we have young students, right, who can easily get bored, who can be distracted, who have other things. So it was challenging in its own way, but like I said, for me, it just got me thinking about what are the ways in which I can also um, engage with the archives. So that's how we got into the summer internship, and we had a bunch of 6 students, all from different disciplines. So we had a few from engineering, we had 2 from arts, And we had somebody from, I think there was one also from management, but I'm not sure. I think Nishita, somebody was from management as well. So we had a bunch of 6 students, and you know, I think it was a great idea in hindsight, to kind of just let them decide what they wanted to do with the archives. Remember, this was still COVID. So we couldn't really take them to Bhavnagar. We couldn't get them to see the archives. But what we did was, we uploaded digitally whatever that we could give access to. So there were a set of correspondence, set of letters that emerged from the archives to do with the ports in Bhavnagar. So essentially, just administrative reports in that sense. Then there was a set of paintings, which we had found in the archives, and we were trying to figure out what are they about and all. So like this, we created a shared Google Drive, and we uploaded material there for the students to really see and decide what they wanted to work with. And it was such an interesting experience because the students actually came up with very interesting ideas, and of course we had to keep them on track and make them accountable. um, uh, Talk to them about the smallest of things, from referencing to to ensure that there is no plagiarism, so all sorts of things. So it was a very interesting exercise, and especially if anybody is in academia here, I think it's a great exercise. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of energy, but it's completely worth it, because there was one student who actually suggested making an application for the library catalog. And he made entire database. In fact, the amount of information that he collected is so important, because they have access to all kinds of things, so which is also problematic. But so one student did that. Another one actually published a coffee table book. She actually created a coffee table book based on the interactions, the archives that she had read. Very nicely done table book. Two students worked on the website for the Patni archives, and I think they did a really good job. So they're engineering students, so they actually helped in creating a website. So everything from design, from choosing the colors to the design to the content. um, they kind of worked through all of that, which was fairly, I think, new for them as well. For us, for me also, it was a fairly new experience. Then we had a student who also worked on one more software, where you link one story to the other, and you click on one and some story pops up, and then it takes you to another story. And I mean, that was very interesting. That's all to do with what we term as digital humanities now, right? Technology. And so they essentially picked up uh, what they were comfortable doing, or maybe not even completely comfortable, but they were curious about it, and they were interested in it, and they worked around it. And that also culminated into um, um, presentation, in fact. So I'll just show you um, what we did with it. In fact, that was also extremely interesting, and we also took it ahead. So this was a presentation which happened. This is again in 2021. And remember, again, all online. I mean, we would have wanted ideally the students to visit the archives, but we couldn't. But these are the 6 students. And it was, I mean, it was, to me, it was very interesting. But generally, I think the feedback was also very good. And they presented, in July. This was all done during the summer months. uh, and of course we had invited people to kind of talk to them, interact, and I think that was a great exercise that we did. Eventually this also, I don't know if I can open it here, but this also culminated into one more thing. I will just quickly show you that, which was, we got them to participate in conferences on digital humanities, uh, organized by IIT Delhi. This is a poster. So so based on the summer internship.
We can't. Okay, it's coming up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So based on the summer internship, uh, we also got students to participate in a conference organized by IIT Delhi, which is based on digital humanities, and this is also the poster that they designed by themselves, um, which I think is also, you know, quite quite nicely done. Um, so this is a coffee table book on the left, that Nishita, I think, had, I forget who had designed. The one on the left, constructing inquiry through, yeah, through port reports. Then there is a small painting, which Tarini had looked at, and she was really struggling. She didn't know what to do with it. These statistical reports are made again by an engineering student, Smith, and this image on the top, where you see this whole lot of connecting dots and connecting lines. This is a software that I forget the name of the software, that Anant was working with. So this is eventually what, um, this is how the entire thing tied up in the end. Um, and this was this year, last year, no, this year, 2022, right? So this is all that I have been doing, all this time. And then of course we had a series of social media posts, which, I would read the archives and then, frame a narrative around it, and then we would have a social media posting. So essentially this is what I have been doing in terms of my engagement with the archives at the with the Patni family. um, this also got me thinking, as of course these are family archives, right? At the same time, Sir Patni was also a larger figure. He also belonged to the state, right? So the archives that are with the family are not just going to be personal archives, they're also going to be public archives, right? And these bundles that are there, you don't know what comes out of those bundles, right? It's like Pandora's box, anything comes out, right? So you have personal correspondences, you'll have some correspondence where, because, and of course, the king works very closely with the divan. So there are stories related to the king and the princes, right? That, like, very interestingly, we had come across the progress report of the princes who were studying in England at that time, right? And how one prince failed, and there's so many stories around this. So you have the divan writing to the princes, because earlier times there was a it was a very common thing that the divan's children would accompany the children of the kings to the schools as their companion tutors. So Sir Patni's son was a companion tutor to the son of the king of Bhavnagar, and they were in England. So a whole lot of correspondence to do with Sir Patni inquiring about the health of the princes, the education of the princes, and then there'll be some other personal note about the failing health of somebody else, and then there'll be another note which talks about port development. So any given bundle would have a whole lot of different stories that would come up. And for us, therefore, as Ishita knows, it's always been this challenge of the sheer size of the archives. It is huge, right? I mean, and it's still not huge in the sense, if you look at the Hari Bhakti archives in Baroda, for instance, that is really big, right? Whereas ours is not so big. But at the same time, when we have individuals working with archives, the scale can look really big. And which is where we need to collaborate, which is where we need to maybe include people who might be working on within similar ideas, to kind of get together and work. So this is what, I have been also grappling with, saying um, how does one move from a personal collection of archives to something else. And because these archives are located in Bhavnagar, which was a princely state, it got me thinking about the other princely states of Kathiawad also. Now, Kathiawad, and I'll just take another 5 minutes and then maybe I'll stop talking about my work. Spoken too much. I haven't taught in the last 6 months, so I'm so not used to talking. Otherwise, professors are very used to listening to their own voice, all the time. They're quite narcissistic that way. But after 5 months, I'm like, oh my God, Why am I talking so much? But yeah, so that got me thinking about Kathiawad, and the fact that that is one region of Gujarat which uh, practically nobody talks about, and the fact that at the time of independence we had almost about 200 odd princely states within Kathiawad. In India, there were 500 odd. Within Kathiawar, you're looking at 200 odd princely states and different sizes. One state can be about 100 kilometers and the other one can be like a few hundred kilometers, right? Different sizes. So the creation of Kathiawar in that sense got me thinking about what's happening here, right? Why are we not talking about Kathiawar? And the fact that just before independence, before India became a democratic republic, in 1930s, there was a conversation going on uh, about having a United States of India, about having a federation of India. That was proposed in 1930s. And that got me thinking, saying, okay, what is the story? Again, nothing I've read in my history books. And then I came across a set of journals in Sir Putney's library, which are called the Desi Rajya. Essentially, it means the princely states. I mean, the native states. And in every, it was a monthly journal, and every issue of the journal had a discussion on federation. Now, these are these really rustic Kathiawad states, and you have a journal which comes out from there, largely in Gujarati, every month, where they're saying, should we become a federation? Should we join the Indian Federation? What is going to happen to us? Right? Where will we be? That got me extremely interested in looking at the history of Kathiawad and looking at what was happening in 20s and 30s. And that is how I formed a project around it, and which is where I came to Scotland on a fellowship. Which is where I'm here on a postdoctoral fellowship, essentially examining Kathiawad and looking at the history of Kathiawad, which is, and I'm doing that in UK, really. I mean, which is, so I need to go back home, do a whole lot of field work. But what this space has done in these 5 months is really helped me to articulate, just sit, read, and write uh, about what am I going to do with these archives, right? What am I going to do with this archival text? So if I have to, in fact, show you the archive that I work with, I had carried a couple of copies. This is a journal that I look at. Right now, this is a text, and it is largely all written in Gujarati. Right, and this is an issue from 1931. Um, so yeah, but I did not even need to carry, in the sense, in fact, but these are not even digitally available. So it essentially just opened up a whole lot of ideas for me, so that's what I've been doing these 5 months. And I have moved from a very regional Bhavnagar based archive to really looking at the larger states of Kathiawad, and figuring and trying to put a narrative there. I'm not a trained historian, but I can definitely look at history from the lens of um, not just literary theory, but also a more interdisciplinary sort of lenses, right? Political theory and literary theory, and a whole lot of ideas that come to my mind. So for me, therefore, an archive has become a very interesting space, which opens up, a whole lot of things to deal with. And for me now, it is more about narrowing it down. Um, so yeah, and of course, along with this, I can also relate to everybody who's also working on personal archives and family archives, because I also, like I said, my father was a freedom fighter, and I'm also trying to chronicle, write about him, and get some archives in place and all of that. So yes, it's an ongoing sort of a thing. So this is where I am. um and hang on, yeah, let me just see if there's anything that I've missed. Yeah, no, okay. Yeah, so this is I think what Ishita also kind of spoke about, and this is really my project here at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Humanities. Um, yeah, and this is the journal that I was talking to you about. So yeah, just a few things that I would want to discuss. But before I do any of that, is there anything that anybody wants to share, or anybody wants to kind of um, is there any curiosity rather?
No, I would
I mean,
just
is
like to ask, you said it is only one Patni family, but there may be many branches of
oh
this
yeah, yeah.
family spread over. So why
Oh
have
yeah.
you thought about incorporating the entire Patni family into this?
That is what Ishita is doing. In fact, Ishita is more equipped to talk about it because she is the one actually, also working very actively with the archives and with Avni. So they have done, I think, a very very interesting oral history project. They have also done a few something along the lines of bringing together students of architecture and getting them to design uh, a whole lot of things. They have done cultural mapping of Bhavnagar. They have, I think, contacted, because when you're looking at family archives, you have to keep everybody in the loop. The archives technically belong to to the entire family, not just one or two people. That, I think, is a big challenge, and it is not easy to get consent of everybody and work together with everybody. But if you do it methodically, if you plan, and if you keep some sort of a transparency in terms of what you're doing, I think that kind of works. And people need to know that you're genuinely interested in doing, in preservation, in all of that. Um, but yes, so I think Ishita at some point should be able to tell you more of what she's doing in the Patni archives, because she's really been associated now very closely with them since a while.
I
So
think
yes,
there is a little bit of awareness gathering momentum that we have to document a family's history. Like I was talking to one of the descendants of the Mysore royal family. So
mm,
when he said how to go about, I said that there is I mean, the curating for culture does it. So he was said I would want some professionals to also do it. So I hope
oh yes, yes.
that Ishita gets this project and gets one side of the family archiving done.
Ishita will host us in the Mysore Palace then. No, in
Yeah,
fact,
we anyways need newer spaces to meet, right? As Vikram said, museums, and so we'll make the palace the next one.
why not? Why not? In fact, one thing that really needs is not really studied is the history of the princely states of India.
Yes.
We do have now scholars looking at larger states like Travancore, like Manu Pillai
Yes.
does that.
Right.
Then we have Mysore. Then we have Jaipur, Jodhpur, I forget, or Bikaner. So these are the bigger um, uh, princely states which have been documented, which are being looked at. But Kathiawad, people don't even know where to place Kathiawad on the map, right? So imagine I'm talking about Kathiawad in Scotland. So for me to even just establish the context was very difficult, you know.
And I
But
think
it
the
is not
difference,
about Kathiawad. Hmm.
sorry to interrupt. So the difference between Kathiawad or Travancore and Madras would, I mean, or Mysore would be that the name changed and the boundary changed. Because in
Yeah,
Mysore state also the boundary changes, but the name remains. So people are able to now associate with the place or at least look for the old maps. But with Travancore and Kathiawad, the names also out, right? So now these have become ethnicities rather than
yeah,
continue to be a place. And I think these
absolutely. And
kind of
Kathiawad,
erasures become very critical to history.
yeah, yeah. In fact, Kathiawad is not even a place in that sense, right? Because it's a series of small, 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 really talukas now, right? And when we look at Gujarat, the only things that come to our mind is maybe Gandhiji and Narendra Modi, unfortunately, I mean, or fortunately, whatever, right? So we don't go beyond Ahmedabad, we don't go beyond Surat, we don't go beyond Baroda, a couple of places. So Kathiawad is a very neglected part. And at the same time, in terms of culture, heritage, it is very, very rich. Like Garba, Shwetal, I'm sure that when you look at Garba, there is so much of history in Kathiawad, like Mataji, right? Kathiawad is Mataji, right? So there is so much that you'll be able to kind of find it, and that's really where the first thing that I wanted to talk about is really that different spaces lend different perspectives. Like in the morning, like we were discussing, and archives really lead to more archives. The moment you start looking at one archive, be it your personal archive or a public archive, it's going to lead you to more stories. It's going to lead you to more archives, right? And that is and for somebody who works with um, a larger scale, where does one stop is a very big question, right? So for somebody like me, where are my boundaries? I do not know, right? I'm still searching, right? I don't know what is the scope or what is the scale at which I'm working right now, because I look at one archive, it opens up another archive, and then it leads to a third archive because it's all connected. History doesn't have one point in start, right? It doesn't start at one point. History is extremely fluid. So at some point, we have to put some sort of a boundary, even an artificial one to it. And which is where my artificial boundary is 1930s. But I cannot possibly be just looking at 1930s. I'm still looking at, early 20th century. I'm still looking at, for instance, the other day in the archives in Edinburgh, in the National Library of Scotland, because there were a lot of Scottish officers in the East India Company who ruled us before the British rule came in. The East India Company, in fact, they are the officers who actually establish Kathiawar or give Kathiawar the nomenclature of princely states, because they have these deals that they're making with these chieftains, right? These small chieftains, and they have these whole lot of treaties and sanads that they're creating. All those treaties and sanads are lying here, right? They're here in the archives. And sanad, a treaty can be stopping female infanticide, which is prevalent in Kathiawar, to saying that you're going to give us so much money for protecting your kingdom. So, and those are all early 19th century or mid 19th century. So, for me, therefore, negotiating between time also is a challenge because the scale is so big. Then there are a whole lot of accounts of how cultivation happens in Kathiawar, right? How is Kasumbo cultivated and how that. So that's what happens when you look at archives, and especially when you look at larger archives um, to do with more public events, they will open up more archives to you. So that was one, and the other one in terms of space, which we spoke, earlier on in the day. Um, it is very interesting actually, because when I go to Bhavnagar and I look at the archives, I'm thinking about them in a certain way because I'm in that space, I'm in that Haveli, I'm, with the family around. I go back to Ahmedabad. I'm thinking about archives in terms of what do I do with my students? How do I get them involved? How do I kind of deal with them? Then I come here in Edinburgh. I'm saying, okay, what are the kind of archives am I likely to find in their national repositories, right? Or the British Library or the Bodleian archives. So I'm looking at archives from that sense, right? In terms of how are they preserved and what all exists here. Then I go to London and I stay with a Kathiawadi family, right? And I'm suddenly introduced to this whole new world of migrant, diasporic Kathiawadi culture, how much of it gets retained, how many traditions get retained, what is Kathiawar. And I actually get to learn about Kathiawar in London because they are the ones who are telling me about kinship. They are the ones telling me about, the different families. They are the ones making me privy to different stories from different families, right? They are the ones who are telling me about how women, when they go back to Kathiawar, still have to, wear the veil. I mean, still do the laj and all of that, right? And you have the same person here being very different. So what I'm saying is, and that also when I look at the archives the next time, I'm going to have those thoughts in my mind. I'm going to have those impressions in my mind. So I think one thing that I have, at least what I have understood, is it's important to look at archives from different spaces. And where is it that you want to articulate yourself from? I have to bring myself back to the fact that I have to publish. I'm in the academia. I need to write an article. I need to write a book. So for me, then I have to narrow it down to that space. Right? So what really, which are the different spaces that make us think about these archives, and how they make us think so differently about the archives? Right? For me, that has been very important. So again, just the last 2 minutes, and then I think I'll kind of also be listen to a podcast and see if you want to read something. Um, so interdisciplinarity is, I think, for me, been very important. By interdisciplinarity, I mean bringing together post-colonial studies, because my project here is on decolonization. So bringing together post-colonial studies, bringing together historical studies, cultural studies, it all intersects in the archive, because when an archive will not tell you what it is, right? You have to make sense of it. So you can give different lens and perspective to it based on what your stronghold is. Um, and yes, again, the last bit that really I would, just say what has really helped me um, is collaboration, right? Collaborating with collaboration again began with when we met Ishita the first time, and we understood so much about cataloging and what how to go about it, to now actually collaborating with people who are working on completely different archives, but the practices might be similar. So in that sense, you might also want to maybe talk to more people who are doing similar work, or um, just get your family more involved, and get about looking at archives. But uh, if you're looking at long-term preservation and digitization I think has become very, very important. um, then there has to be a sort of a structure to it. Very again, the last thing, when I was in London and I was staying with this Kathiawadi family, um, the husband and wife, they're both from Kathiawad, and the husband works in the IT, and but on the side, during the pandemic, every other day he would go to the British Library and collect archives from Kathiawad and digitize them. So he would take pictures and put up everything on the digital space. So now what he has is one huge repository of all kinds of information, which is completely non-curated, which is just there, right? So either for somebody like me, it can be helpful when I know how to sieve out and what to look for, or it can just become very overwhelming and you don't know what to do with it. So this is what I meant, that to really have some bit of hand holding, some bit of collaboration, I think really helps when we look at archives, especially if you don't have the experience in it. Yeah, okay, I'm going to stop here now. Yeah, of course. You don't know how to raise a hand also, Shwetal, just talk.
Yeah, so I know this need to collaborate, to kind of see it from different perspectives, also to kind of have the right kind of structure going for you. Now, one very critical question is, how do I go about that?
Yeah,
Because,
yeah.
and also, I think this one is more for Ishita. While I'm at the fourth workshop, I'm really wondering if mine is not a personal archive. I know that Patni archive went from personal to public as you started opening it, and you also were aware that it's a public archive. But what I am working on is almost only a public archive, and maybe I can take out my own personal archives from it, depending on who I
Hmm, hmm.
want to document a little more on, or from people around me. So I don't know if the approach changes when something is so not vast, but I think it's only meant for everyone. It's not you know insular in
Hmm.
the sense that you're dealing with one group of people. So does the approach change? And yes, how do you collaborate? How do you reach out? How do you employ people to do this? What does it cost? I'm like, I'm
Sh-
just
yeah, no, these questions are always there. They haunt us. So, Shwetal, if I may ask, how involved are you in this project, and what do you do otherwise? I
so
mean, is
I'm
it?
a visual artist, I'm an educator. And at this point, I think, looking at what next in my life, because I
uh,
mean, I've been doing independent projects, things like that. So life's been
Are
a
you
hustle.
affiliated? Are you affiliated with any university or any?
Not right now, no. I mean, I
Oh,
work as a visiting faculty at NID, and at even D school in Bangalore, but I'm just a visiting faculty. Yeah.
So have you thought about it, maybe just beginning really small by just putting together or curating some sort of an exhibition of whatever that you've collected so
Hmm.
far,
Hmm.
in terms of you're looking at you're looking at Garba, right?
Right,
You're
right.
looking at and what about it are you looking at?
So, yeah, I mean, as I was talking to you and I was listening to you, something that has always been consistent in my head is that I'm doing this to perpetuate the culture and
Hmm.
not to preserve it. I mean, it's a constant thing that keeps coming to me, that the words conservation and preservation somehow don't gel with what I'm working on. And
Sure.
Ishita knows that I have this little bit of a I don't know, almost a distaste for anything which is very academic. I want things to be very um,
Hmm.
easy to digest for people, because I feel what I'm doing is extremely popular. You know,
Hmm. Of course,
where
of course.
did I miss some message for me over there?
Yeah, yeah. That's Ishita. Yeah.
Yeah. So, sorry, what
So
was I saying?
no,
It's
no.
it's
So,
it's a very popular thing, right? It's so I feel that it needs to have, even in the way it reaches people, has to be very popular. It cannot be something very academic.
agreed,
Yeah.
agreed,
Yeah.
agreed, agreed. But so then, do you want to really look at Garba very closely and maybe pick to begin with,
Hmm.
pick up maybe conventional ways in which Garba has been
Yes.
portrayed? Like, for
Yes.
instance, you have Gujarati films, right?
Huh.
Or Gujarati folk theater,
Hmm.
right? Or Gujarati, or say even your embroideries,
Hmm.
right? There are so many ways in which Garba is portrayed.
Hmm.
So this is just a thought again,
Yeah.
because I'm not extremely familiar with your work, and but as an outsider, if I'm listening to what you're saying and what you want to how you want to really look at popular forms of Garba and ensure that they're perpetuated, maybe begin by just looking at one or two popular ways in which Garba has been portrayed or continues to be portrayed, and just do a exhibit or a showcasing of that, if that kind of helps. Right? Like, for
Hmm.
instance, when you look at a lot of these traditional embroidery items and all of that, right? They have the typical structure of a garba,
Hmm.
right? Maybe that, and then you want to just talk about that and different parts of Gujarat from where it comes, or you might want to look at a more popular version in terms of, the films that have done
Hmm.
this garba, or in fact Doordarshan does a whole series of garbas every Navratri, and so there's so
Hmm.
many ways in which garba through television, for instance, right? So really giving a specific lens to it will help you at least come to terms with your own,
Hmm.
coming to grips with the topic, because the
Hmm.
topic by itself is very big,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah. But then, what are ways in which you
So
can take garba
something that
ahead?
I have been very impressed by is the way Shabnam has been working with the Kabir project. Like,
Mm,
yes,
mm,
I'm sure she has a lot in terms of text, and she's published books and films. But I think just going to one town to another town, singing those songs and making them part of. I mean, today teenagers know Kabir songs and
mm,
they
mm,
sing
mm,
it to
mm.
rock. So
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure.
that is, I think, what really appeals to me in terms
So
of
then you, so then
archive.
you might,
Oral
uh,
history stays as oral history, and
so then you might want to collaborate with somebody who's doing that, or who knows these artists. So you might want to contact universities also around, because they are the ones who also usually know about these artists, these folk artists, and and therefore set up some sort of a collective of sorts,
Hmm.
where but again, you will need people. You can't single-handedly do this.
Can't
It's a
do
very
it.
big project.
Yeah.
So you need, which is where you need to talk to somebody who has done something similar. Like, speak to Shabnam herself and see how she conceived this idea and how she went about doing it. But remember, Kabir is one person. Your Garba is not Kabir.
Yeah.
Garba is performance, right? Garba is also singing. Garba is manifest in many
Religion
different forms.
also. Yeah.
So pick up one form then to begin with. to make it more manageable. Otherwise, what happens is we keep getting overwhelmed in our heads.
Okay.
So it's good to begin small, is at least what I feel, to so that we can grapple with it, and then once we have a sort of a pattern, we can. But that is where it's important to work with somebody who has worked on it, or
Yeah.
that'll really help. This is just what I can say. But Garba by itself is a very, very interesting topic. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure if I helped you or I confused you more, but it helps to narrow your focus down and
No,
begin.
actually, Sana, what I need the most is resonance with people, because I work a lot in isolation. I've done most of my work till now on my own. It's just who I am. But I definitely crave for this exchange, So whatever
Yeah,
is being said is important, because it
yeah.
then leads me to think about other things. So
If your end, if your end idea is to perpetuate an oral tradition, you will have to talk to people. You will have
yes,
to go out.
yeah,
Because these have never been isolated forms, but the form
yeah,
by itself of Garba is not isolated.
yeah,
It's community,
yeah,
and therefore the form itself lends itself to be worked out as a community. Like,
yeah.
when I look at the archives, it can still be an individual project to some extent, right? Because it's a piece of text. But when you look at living oral tradition like Garba, it has to be a community, must be really. But I mean, it can be done in several ways.
Right.
But yeah, that's what I would think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Uh, so so while I was looking at the archives here in London and in Edinburgh, I came across this interesting accounts of a traveler um, who traveled to India, a Scottish traveler, early 20th century. And that's a piece of archive that I'm going to share with you. And those are his notes. And then I would want you to also listen to the podcast to see how there are, to see what you can make of it. Kind of give it away, but let me just open the document. It's a short document. It's not a very long one. It says Maharaja of Patiala. It's written in 1902.
It's fine, you can read it.
Yeah, you can read it. Okay. Let me so essentially, if we are also a little bored of reading, this is essentially an account of Ian Malcolm, who used to be a traveler, and he has gone to Patiala and he is describing the Maharaja. And I'm just going to go down so that you don't have to read all of it, but I'll just read it aloud so that we are all together. But so he's talking about this young Maharaja, right? At 3 o'clock, the young Maharaja with his council and tutors came to see me, and we had a short talk in the drawing room. He's a very nice-looking little boy, modest and well-mannered. His teachers give a good account of him, both his books and his games. I told him how well his name was known in England, and that Patiala had a great reputation to keep up, and that we in England would always watch with interest his career and wish him luck. This is a white man talking about a Indian prince. Later on, we played lawn tennis and went and saw the roller skating rink. The Maharaja was skating there in his short sleeves and dashing about just like a little English boy. He needs all the exercise he can get as he's inclined to be stout. Next day, he talks about an escort and the cavalry and all of that. Um, and he's, of course, the courtyard was filled with a lot of retainers and, the entire description about 2 elephants and silver howdah and trappings of gold and scarlet. And then he talks about jewels, right? So he's talking to this little boy, this Maharaja, and he says, we walked together first and others followed behind. I promised to write him for his birthday and indulge him in a conversation for a few minutes. Then a procession of men arrived with trays of jewels, which were laid in double file from my feet down the steps onto the carpet below. These were to be taken as gifts and returned. I only I only keeping a very long, rich turban of green and gold presented to me by the council on behalf of the state. These things were shortly taken away. Another man arrived with a silver bowl and salt spoon, out of which a little Maharaja ladled a spoonful of powerful scent on my handkerchief. And from a tray, he gave me a packet of betel nut done up in the silver leaf. With this, the darbar closed. However, then he goes on to describing the jewels. He was always anxious to show me the Patiala jewels, which had been laid out for inspection. They were certainly well worth seeing. Beautiful carved emeralds of enormous size, ropes of pearls, a huge diamond and ruby watch, many necklaces of all sorts, and headgear indescribable for the turbans. I persuaded him to put on a lot of these things and then photographed him with his uncle Kaur Saab. Right? So I'll just stop sharing here. But this is just to give you a sense of what how the traveler is describing the Maharaja and the jewels and all kinds of, because Patiala was known for its jewelry, right? The Patiala necklace and all that is very well known. And if you know the history of Raja Dilip Singh was from Patiala, right? And his case is very well known, where he was brought to England as a really young boy. And, he was trained in England. And then this is not Dilip Singh, this is his grandson. Now I want you to listen to a podcast, right?
His eyes get me. They're sad and kind,
We can
like he's
listen.
lived through something.
Okay, so just before this goes on, this is a very interesting podcast series. And if you see the title, it's called Decolonizing a Maharaja. Just listen to it and somewhere you'll be able to relate to what we just read.
He's handsome with a trimmed black beard and mustache. He's wearing a silk kurta with a turban dripping with pearls, emeralds, rubies, topped off with a black plume or kalgi. Around his neck are strings and strings of pearls and emeralds, a ruby necklace, a belt of emerald, and on his left arm, strapped in a bazuband or armband, is the legendary Kohinoor diamond.
The background is vibrant, electric blues, turf greens, and the shapes are ornate, flowers and curlicues. There's a busyness to it that evokes the feeling of India, the feeling of going to a loud and colorful Indian vegetable market.
The Maharaja is surrounded by symbols. I see a ship, a river stained with blood, a golden throne, and a tomb. They're clues to his life. What could they mean? This is Chatroom 16, Decolonizing a Maharaja, on Scrolls and Leaves. I'm Gayatri Vaidyanathan.
And I'm Mary Rose Abraham. We have a small request. We're an independently funded podcast, so if you like our work, please consider donating. Every little bit helps us to continue telling stories from the margins of history, science, and cultures. You can find details on our website, scrollsandleaves.com/support. And of course, if you have feedback, do let us know. Thank you.
The painting is called A Casualty of War, and the artists are Amrit and Rabindra Kaur, who go by the moniker the Singh twins. It depicts the Maharaja Duleep Singh, the last king of the Sikh Empire in Punjab. He'll feature in one of our upcoming episodes from Season 1. Stay tuned.
In this episode, we'll talk to Frederike Vogt, the curator of South Asia at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. She's been on a decade-long quest to investigate and restore the histories to objects in the museum that speak of colonization.
Back in 2008, when Friederike first joined the museum, she attended an exhibition that featured objects that once belonged to an Indian Maharaja named Duleep Singh.
There were bracelets made of gold. There was a large, probably rosewater bottle, probably a cashmere chiseled, a little pen box, and also another box which he might have used for his personal things. It's not entirely clear, so definitely the pen box for his writing. So there was also a personal aspect related to this object, but also to the bracelets, which you could imagine that he had been wearing.
And the labels on the display cases
Presented these objects as a man who lived in Britain, spent a lot of money, had a very aristocratic lifestyle, and was known for his splendor.
Friederike felt this didn't quite mesh with what she'd read about the Maharaja. We'll tell you his backstory briefly.
Dilip is 5 years old in 1843 when he becomes Maharaja of the Sikh Empire, which is one of the last kingdoms standing against the British in India. It is a magnificent monarchy with a rich treasury. When the British see a child on the throne, they seize the day, launch 2 bloody Anglo-Sikh wars, and annex Punjab in 1849. The Maharaja, who's now a teenager, is exiled to Britain and groomed to be an exotic plaything at court. He's kept on a short leash because they know if anyone can unite the Indians, and especially the fierce Punjabi warriors, against the Brits, it's Dilip. Later in life, Dilip becomes disillusioned. He tries to go back to Punjab to take back the throne, and he's arrested en route. He eventually dies alone in a Paris hotel room.
So, a tragic tale. Not exactly the life of ostentatious splendor portrayed in the exhibition, is it?
And this didn't seem to fit with what I had read about him, that he had to leave Punjab, that he was basically in exile. So there was a contradiction between these objects and what I knew about his life. And this is the part of the story I wanted to bring out, and this guided my research, which I then carried out later. So to understand much more how we got these objects in the collections and what they can tell us about Dilip Singh, his life when he was still in India and when he came to Britain.
Friederike wanted to let Dilip's objects speak, not by penning yet another authoritative article investigating their origins, but rather by inviting dialogue from voices that would generally not be involved in authoritative historical reconstructions, the voices of the Sikh diaspora, to whom this history means a lot. So, in 2009, she invited 2 emerging British Sikh artists to reflect on the Maharaja's objects at the museum and paint. She hoped the process would
give these objects a new life and bring them from a historical past into the present. And given that we have so many historical objects, if they stay in history, some of the potential of what they can tell us, what they can mean to us, is lost. So it is very important to engage with communities across the places where we live.
Back then, Amrit and Rabindra Kaur, who paint together as the Singh twins, were still emerging artists. This commission boosted their career. They're pretty big now. They've exhibited at the National Portrait Gallery in London and the National Gallery of Modern Art in New Delhi, among other places. And they favor the style of Mughal miniatures, informed by their heritage, though their art is sharply political and contemporary.
I had met the Singh twins before. The idea was born that we would commission the Singh twins with a painting reinterpreting the jewelry. So reinterpreting just means that we were interested, we wanted to see what their thoughts were on the jewelry, on their own history, because being Sikh but born in Britain gave them a particular perspective on the jewelry. So I met with them and we discussed it. They saw the jewelry and then they created this fascinating painting, Casualty of War. So the portrait of Dilip Singh, showing him against a backdrop of many different elements. So if you know the style of the Singh twins, then you know they work with all these intricate details that you can look at their paintings again and again and you will discover something. So the complexity of Dilip Singh's stories is very much captured in their portrait.
I can see in the painting the Lahore fort which Dilip ruled out of, which was the capital of the Sikh Empire, the Satluj River, which was the border of the empire, stained with the blood of Sikh warriors, a setting sun, Dilip's throne, which is now displayed at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the pen case that Friederike mentioned earlier, and the rose water bottle, The Kalgi atop the Maharaja's turban that belonged to Guru Gobind Singh, the Sikh spiritual leader, which has since vanished. It's meant to indicate cultural appropriation. A Bible to show Duleep's conversion to Christianity. He eventually reconverted to Sikhism. The tomb where he's buried in Suffolk.
The portrait includes the jewellery, but it shows it in this tension between somebody who was born in India, was sent into exile, he converted to Christianity and then embraced Sikhism again. It's very much about how you feel as an individual, what is your identity and how important is identity to you. In this context, they embedded our objects. And identity is a question that is important to all of us. It doesn't matter how old we are and where we live.
In 2014 to 15, the museum held an exhibition of the painting and his other objects.
So when we had the exhibition Indian Encounters, I wanted to use this in order to engage with the Sikh in Scotland. And there's the very active Gurdwara in Glasgow, but we also have Sikhs in Edinburgh, of course.
They also invited young Sikhs in Edinburgh to explore their own history.
And young Sikh, they were just brilliant. The way how they engaged with the history through these objects, but also through the places. They went to the castle where Duleep Singh lived in Scotland. They came to us to see the painting and the jewellery, and also went to London to see the Golden Throne, which had...
Okay. So maybe if you find it interesting, you can kind of listen to it also by your own. But is there any thought that comes to your mind from what we read and what you heard?
I think for me, it was interesting that in both the cases, my visualization of the space occupied was slightly or maybe a little more different. I think just the form of the archives of the representation. One is an original text, so I'm taking it way too maybe formally, sincerely, whereas the other one is more imaginative for me.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Any quick? This is the throne of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in the Victoria and Albert Museum. It's not a complete picture, but yeah. And this is the picture from Ian Malcolm's diary of the young Maharaja and what he was describing. This is also in the archives. Yeah. So essentially, why I thought this might help is just to really tell you about different ways in which archives work, right? I mean, one piece of archive is from a travel is from a travelogue, is from a travel document from the early 20th century. The other piece of archive has been engaged with through a podcast, right? So this podcast essentially brings to you, or it makes alive an existing archives, like what she was saying, the jewels of this Maharaja, which are described even in the travelogue about these rubies and pearls and all of that. These jewels are also displayed in the museum here at Edinburgh. I have seen that kada, I have seen all of that, right? So the archive essentially, and then the archive was used to involve the Sikh community. If you heard the podcast, she says that we had invited a bunch of Sikhs in Edinburgh, in Scotland, to come and engage with that exhibition and to give their opinion and their views about how they look at Duleep Singh's objects, right? Or objects associated with him. So what I was trying to say is, on one hand, there's a highly academic exercise of going through these travelogues and doing a post-colonial reading about how the Maharajas wanted to click pictures with these fully dressed, how the Britishers wanted to click pictures with these exotic-looking Maharajas. On the other hand, the same, the objects from the same house of Patiala have been displayed in a museum, and you're engaging a community also to come and participate and give their views about it. So essentially, this is to drive the point that the scope of the archives can be really large. And what you choose to do with it really is going to be very important. I don't know if this helped or it made sense to you, but I just thought that this was very interesting to see that the same jewelry the similar jewelry which has been described in the travelogue has been displayed here eventually in a museum, and and then somebody has even drawn, has painted about it. So how does a dissemination of archive happen, right? How does it reach out to the like Shwetal had the question, right? How does one perpetuate it? So these are important spaces that can be explored. In fact, creating a podcast can also be a very interesting space um, to explore. So yeah. So community participation, yes, of course, exactly. And especially, like I said, involving the contemporary generation and to see how they feel about the archives really is very important, rather than just an individual saying, this is what I think about the archive and this is what I would, to actually ask the people who are going to take it forward and getting them involved, and even for Gitaji, for instance, you're looking at family archives, right? You're looking at how is it that your grandchildren would want to remember your husband, right?
Yes.
A good exercise would be to ask them, instead of you saying that I would want to do this, do that, of course. But somewhere even asking the children about the kind of associations that they would want to have and how they would want to remember, looking at it from the other way round, might get them more interested in taking care of those things or taking care of those objects or those memories.
But they have not seen the grandfather.
Which is, I mean, they've not seen, but they've seen pictures, right? They've heard stories, right? Now, what is it about him that you want to preserve? If there are stories you want to preserve, you can easily explore the idea of just recording all the stories, verbal recording, Or if there are objects, then you might want to explore the ways in which your children relate to these objects and want to preserve them. Or you just, so we essentially have to be also very creative in the way we are looking at archives. Like I said, for me as an academic, I cannot be very creative because I have to look at facts. I have to look at, these archives from a very, very narrow perspective. But if they're personal archives, and if if you're not bound by any of those, then there are creative ways in which I think the archives can really be explored. So you might want to, have a more involved, a more holistic approach to what archives can be like. So yeah,
So
Shwetal,
how
you're
do you
thinking.
do it when you involve the community, when you want to record a community's archival information?
Community archives, in fact, Ishita, like I said, would also be very equipped to tell you how to do that, because I think with the Patni archives, they have done that, where they've done some cultural mapping and, identified people who can talk about the community. So to begin with, you will have to, again, not something, if when you work with a community single-handedly is very difficult.
Yes.
You have to identify people who are also going to be as driven to work with the community and, will want to be, will want to be involved. And then identify people whom you can talk to, who'll be willing to kind of, be a part of this. You can begin small. So when you're looking at one large community, maybe in your case, when you look at BTM, layout itself is so big.
Yes.
Identify a small portion of it, geographically, maybe. Whatever helps you think that I can do this. Whatever helps you think, okay, itna ho sakta hai. Usse shuru kare. And then you can replicate.
Okay.
If that you think can work.
Makes sense.
Because when we look at things in large bulk, right?
You get overwhelmed.
Yeah, you get very overwhelmed. So समझ नहीं आता है कहाँ से शुरू करें. तो छोटे से शुरू करके फिर अगर if it's okay, then you replicate it, you modify it, and then work on it. So जैसे आपकी लेन से शुरू करें,
Oh.
and then go to other spaces, and then it can
Okay.
become a wider project. And then along the way, you also identify people who are interested in a similar thing. Shwetal, you're very lost. What happened? Are you thinking? You're mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry. No, I was just thinking of different possibilities and also kind of like, it's like, working with what strengths I have.
Hmm.
And also about, as you said, ask people what do they want.
Yeah.
So, who do I ask? Where do I ask? How do I ask? Because how you ask the question makes a lot of difference, And
Yeah.
with the young generation, and
It
yeah, so
you know it
just
might
thinking, yeah,
it might actually be simpler than you think, Shwetal. It's only when
probably,
we keep thinking and we don't
probably.
get around doing it is when it seems very big.
Yeah,
At least that's
I'm
what I
also
am also learning.
geographically distanced from my place of work. So, that
Right.
kind of sometimes, because I live in Bangalore and I
Ah,
go twice a year to do things in Gujarat. So that kind of brings a bit of disconnect and overthinking when you're away
maybe
from.
just begin with maybe just begin with Bangalore and Garba in Bangalore and see how people are doing Garba there and see what they have
Yeah,
to say about it. Because
yeah,
it's even more pertinent because it's not in that space of Garba. It's
right.
disconnected geographically. So
Yeah,
how does being a Bangalorean, how do you or being a Gujarati in Bangalore,
yeah,
what do you think about Garba? Which are the ways in which you think you can, again, just saying
mm,
that whatever
right,
whatever
right.
kind of gets you immediately involved,
Mm.
or gets you working, gets you started,
So
maybe
my
that might.
focus has been on Baroda Garba, but even that I can do in Bangalore by reaching out to people from Baroda and
Yeah.
again doing more on that. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So if you're looking at specifically the Baroda style Garba and
Mm,
MS University and the role
mm,
it also plays in that particular
yeah.
Garba, that
Mm,
because culturally that's very important. Just identify people you can start talking to about Garba and just at least open conversations.
mm,
And the more people you talk to, the more ideas they will give, and then you can pick which one kind of appeals and then collaborate and then start working.
yeah, sure. Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because Garba is everywhere in the sense wherever you'll have Gujarati, you'll have Garba. So
Yeah. No, and then if I find people in Bangalore who kind of also have some show some interest, then maybe as I was talking about the resonance of having somebody to talk to and discuss will
yeah.
happen. So
So you might never know what this also leads you to. In fact, it might go beyond the form of Garba and actually tell you more about traditions and customs and rituals, and it might open up a whole new
yeah,
discussion
yeah,
for you.
that has already happened, and that's why sometimes I get overwhelmed because it's gone through food, it has gone clothing, food, lifestyle, everything has kind of gotten woven in. But as you
Yeah,
said, I mean, kind of just picking things out, looking at my strengths, possibilities,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
is what um,
At no point can we possibly do everything. I mean,
yeah,
we can barely, we can just do as much as we can do because,
yeah,
and then, it becomes like an intra-generational project also. So, for instance, even what I am doing is like just even like 5% of what can be done.
right,
So, that awareness needs to be there.
yeah.
Otherwise, it can also be disheartening. But yeah. Kaustav, anything that you would like to say? Okay, Kaustav is
Yes,
quiet.
yeah, like it's like interesting for me that how can be I mean our archives can be dissemination in the form of dissemination. I can how could I say, like uh, takes it into in a wider way,
Mm-hmm.
so wider perspectives. Like I mean, when I'm dealing with Katha, so uh,
Mm-hmm.
I have seen one family in Chandanagar, a lady who has a huge collection of Katha. When she has died, like in her death ceremony, there was a display of the Katha.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, her own kathas, like I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
katha she
Mm-hmm.
made. So it was like a very domestic kind of archives. So only the visitors, only the relatives who were there for, I mean, invited
Right.
there to
Mm,
join that
mm,
ceremony. So
mm.
it can be a repository of, I mean, what I am doing. So it's
Right.
also the kind of connecting stories to one family to another. So, and
Yeah.
also there is a
Mm,
work by Pika Ghosh with a book of Katha, like how the Kolkata and the, I mean, West Bengal and
mm.
Bangladesh transition with Kathas and all. So,
Of
and
course.
lot of
Mm,
works
mm.
are there happen with Katha. I mean, that
Right.
the
Right.
archives in
Right.
Guru Sadar Museum and Victoria and Albert Museum and Pennsylvania Museum, worldwide it's actually disseminated. Whether
Yes.
it is a gifted Katha or like uh, just went for archiving. So I'm getting
Yeah.
the threads also,
Mm.
like how I can work in a larger perspective. So
But you were
yeah.
looking at home, right? You were looking at also exploring what home means, right?
Yes. Actually, actually, I'm looking at home, but it like whatever the katha made throughout the world, like it's there. The katha is actually about home, like stories from the home, which is
Home. Yeah.
actually created by the woman, like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
domestic, the stories from
Sure.
the domestic sphere. Yeah.
But
From
in
that
fact, even Katha,
perspective, I'm
in
trying to
fact,
connect.
yeah, in fact, even Katha work itself incorporates stories, right? Because there will be birds. I mean, the
Yes,
motifs within Katha itself
yes.
also has a lot of these stories to do with the region from where it is produced.
Yes, and
So
also
yeah.
like family stories, like whatever their everyday life is, it's also
Mm,
illustrated on Katha.
yeah.
Many
Yeah.
examples are there. So yeah, and
That
also
might be a very
Vaishnavite
good place
stories
to
and all.
begin. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, that's a very good place to begin. I think when you just look at Kantha work and you look at, how you can just exhibit different stories through embroidery. It's like
yeah,
literally embroidering your life, right? Your everyday
yeah.
life.
It's like that. Yeah, and also there is that Triveni Sangam in. I live very near to Triveni Sangam here, so
Mm,
there is that port called Shaptogram. It's an old uh, port, like
mm,
pre-colonial port. So there
mm.
was that trading routes of Katha also. Like
Right,
uh,
right.
in history, I mean, I have read somewhere like that Vasco da Gama actually got that Katha in Africa before reaching to
Mm.
India. So,
Okay.
so the trading of Katha is actually a pre-colonial phenomena. It's not like that. Ki, it's
Of
like
course, of course. Of
so.
course.
So
It's just going to
these
be
are there.
about now. It's just going to be now about how you bring the entire story together and what you do with it.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of that, like how threads could be joined, like different points could be in a, like, I mean, more uh,
Mm.
narrower and narrative way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But there are many platforms to do that. Like for
yeah.
instance, when we heard the scrolls and leaves,
Hmm.
they work extensively with sounds. So
Yeah.
yeah, so if you listen to their podcast, they will incorporate a lot of sounds in their podcast also to give you a sense of that space.
Hmm.
So that is also very interesting. So now with the digital world, a lot of options have opened up. So I'm sure you'll be able to figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Um, I was just wondering, I think I put in the chat also, but I mean, if Shwetal wants to, I think just to answer Geeta ma'am's question about community engagement, Shwetal, I was wondering if you wanted to share how you did your project instead of right now me again getting into more of Patni archives.
As in where I have reached till now in my work, you mean? Or
Yes,
uh,
yes. I mean, just the fact that you have gone ahead, documented so much around the Garba from different kinds of community members. What are the key things that you kept in mind? Because this will be a good closing before we go on to tomorrow, where I will anyway show community engagement the way we have been approaching it for the two exhibitions. That's what I'm thinking. Just thinking aloud at this point.
Yeah, I think I am confused in every session because of my material and the focus little bit different kind of working on someone else and their specific journey and their specific artworks and specific time. I think I hope all these sessions have worked for me, but I still confused what is the ending point for me after this workshop. I just go through on these all events in every month and trying to figure out with my materials. So,
Nijum, is your focus academic largely?
my focus is the 90s journey of Mahbub and Lipi,
Yes, yes. But what do you
including
want to do
their
with
including
it?
their artwork, some point of view, and including their activities not related to academic area.
Do you
Because
want to write a paper about it?
huh?
Do you want to write a paper about it?
I don't know if possible, I want to develop a paper, but I have no previous experience about producing a paper or produce archival show. Or I have experience in organizational archiving in last 1.5 year. So still there is not any progress like specific reach in a specific point, so that I cannot focus on the ending point of this project, because it
So
is already we are reaching fourth session. And
yeah, no. So Nijum, this can happen because we again get overwhelmed um, with the information that we have, and sometimes we think that we don't have direction. But remember, there is always direction in the sense with every session that you've attended, you're already listening, you're already interacting, you're already thinking about your archives, you're already moving, right? It's not like you are stuck. Your end point will start emerging once you have a starting point, in the sense that if you want to write, you start writing. Begin by, like what Ishita was suggesting, that begin by maybe just writing a small story, right? And this can be for everybody who wants to do this exercise. I think that just by writing a small story, writing um yeah, what is Ishita saying? How your questions about the archives are emerging. Yeah, yeah. Um, so essentially, Nijum, if you the one thing that I have also faced and I continue to face a challenge with is in terms of writing. Personally, I have a block which comes up once in a while, and it really gets me into the space where I don't know where I'm going. But the moment I start writing, right? The moment you start seeing your thoughts on paper, Nijum,
yes,
you will be able to get a sense of direction, right?
okay,
Just write whatever that comes to your mind, saying, "Ye project hai. What do I want to do with this? Exhibition karna hai, paper likhna hai. How much do I have?" Just take stock. Just maybe write it down very simply, not for anybody else to read, but for your own self,
okay.
right? For instance,
And I'm gonna,
if you attended three of the workshops, right? In the three workshops, maybe
mm-hmm.
there is something that you would have picked up. Just write that down first. Say for instance, ये workshop में से अगर पता चला कि का blog, you can make a blog or you can make a podcast or you do, बस उतना लिख दो. These are the possibilities, right? Eventually, some sort of a mind mapping will definitely help.
Yeah, and I have another point of view that both of the artists I met with them, I discussed with them, I get their material also. But still, this is the final ending point. What should be? This is the confusing thing for me. But it's not like that. When I'm starting, there is a confusion that if I can use their audio or material, if I can get their permission to reach out the materials. But now I have all these things like the catalogs from 1991, 1994. I have all these materials now. Artworks, photos I have now, but I just cannot focus on it. That what is the outcome? It's
If
like
you
paper is
once
a
you
new
start,
thing. Yeah,
hmm,
paper is a new thing today added by you, and yeah. So I think I should write down this and share it in the next session
writing
or
will
tomorrow
always help.
session.
Writing
Okay.
will always help because it gives a structure to our thoughts. And sometimes these structures are very important because they will tell you your boundaries, they will tell you what all, where you are, where you're standing. So writing will definitely help. Just start writing your everyday thoughts, at least what are what you're getting projected this direction, that it can be different directions, which is okay. but just start writing. It'll help.
Okay, and today I'm watching the Kostov's presentation, and this is very interesting from the starting to this session. I just thought that if I can reach in this point, I can evolve myself with this kind of journey like Kostov already did. This is very interesting, and congratulations, Kostov. I cannot do so many things like that. What you can frame in your workshop.
I just
So I
wanna
think I'm going
suggest,
to
like,
pitch in. Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to pitch in here. After then you can take over. Nijum, I think what the more you are explaining where you stand, what I would suggest is to actually work with your material. So the fact that first you didn't have the material, of course, was itself a big question. And now that you have the material, um, what have you done with it is a very important question. So I know maybe the fact that not all our sessions are about direct handling with your own material kind of. So we are not getting into that more hands-on, necessarily hands-on exercises every time with your own material. But when you're referring to costumes or even the kind of questions that maybe Shefal is asking, is where I'm presuming that apart from the workshop, they are actually working with the material. So whatever exercises, let's say try record management today, try writing stories about your objects, try mapping keywords, which the subject keywords of your material. I think you will have to take those kind of trial and error initiatives rather than only counting on these 3 sessions every month to basically completely carve your process. You will also have to try and tell us what is working, not working. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, Shita.
thanks for your appreciation. But what I just want to say is, what worked for me is just get into work. When I have started working, like just making books and making katha or something like that, it actually works. It's not like that ki I'm just keeping myself with the archival materials. I've started working simultaneously, so it's like that. I mean, as Tana mentioned that we can start writing. It's like that. I'm not writing, I'm just working with my, I mean, in my practice. It's like that. Yeah.
And I think the summary of that, I mean, both these different points would be that all of us are suggesting to try things without worrying about the final output at this stage. So whether it is possible making diaries or Shepal might have tried, tree mapping her project. None of them yet know whether it will become an exhibition, whether it will become a searchable database. I think right now the working with the archives means you are getting to know your archives, and that is how the project will get defined and redefined. And
In
I think
fact,
from what Tana, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, sorry, Ishita. In fact, a better idea would be to actually not know what you really want to get as a final outcome, because that keeps a lot of options open.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, for instance, Nijum, even I don't know. I mean, I might have a book, I might have a paper. I don't know what I'm going to do, right? But I just engage with the archive, and then something emerges out of that. Then a structure comes out of it. So don't run away from looking at the archive, right? Just go headlong into it, and then you will be able to, see what you can do with it best. Geeta, you were trying to say something, but you were on mute.
Yeah. What I wanted to ask you is my husband is one of the pillars of the IT company he worked with. He has put in 35 years of service, and in an IT company that is very rare because people jump after 10 years, 15 years. But he is stuck for about 35 years, and he has formulated many of the policies. So he is not only respected, but he is revered also. What I came to know, I did not know about this, because he, as a husband, as a person, I find him is entirely different to what he was in the office. And this I came to know when people started sending me messages on my WhatsApp saying how he has affected them, and whatever they are today, they are because he gave them a direction. He was a role model for them. So what I thought was, before I go into the community BTM layout, which will be for next year after June, now immediately what I want to do is I want to collect all the people's feedback from his subordinates, from his superiors, from his colleagues, how they should be very attractive and tell a story by themselves, not just like he came, he touched us, something very interesting out of the way that brings out a facet of his personality. So I just thought I working with a group of people, told them if they can help me sending emails to their known people, because they know the people in their office, and whether they can send all the, how much ever they can get the feedback from his colleagues or whoever. I think I will collect that, and I thought, why not I bring a book that not only will people will be able to identify his with whom he has worked with, but as an inspiration for the youngsters, because you find that in the IT companies, they get very distressed, they think of so many things, fast growth and all that. So maybe with these sightings from various people or different categories, maybe he will touch their lives also, to see how they can go ahead in their life. So that way I thought maybe getting this and bringing out in the form of a book, will it be beneficial, or how it can be?
No, I think, I mean, it's a wonderful idea. My only suggestion would be also approach the company to see the company where he worked, to see if
I have approached them. They have formed a team. And I also told them, I asked them whether if I bring out a small book, and Ishita had suggested, don't only write the matter. If on one side you write the matter, have some archival photos from the company.
Yes. Pictures, visuals always work very well. So
Yes. And then we were discussing, we thought that just it should not only touch the people who will read it, oh, I know him, Mr. Rao, and then put it aside, but it is also should be a book to be referred by the youngsters today who don't know him. Oh, this type of
eventually, Geeta, you can also make it an open access book online. But once you have a hard copy out, you can also put it online, see that it reaches out to a wider audience. So all those possibilities can happen.
So I'm going to request everyone that the exercises which we had in mind for you all might want to still try it before we meet tomorrow, is to actually take one archival object and write about it yourself, a story, not just basic description, but a story. That would be really exciting to start the morning with. I will shorten my presentation, but I think that will be a good way to continue these conversations.
Thank you very much.
Nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
It really helps. Thank you, Geeta.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
See you all tomorrow at 10:30.